alchemy and science, as we understand it today, really have the same telos, which is to dominate nature. And the impulse is the same, that man must dominate and control nature. People are talking about how we're in a mental health epidemic right now. Why is that happening when we're at the close? Well, I know at some metric, some reasonable metric, this is the most material prosperity we've had in a long time, or let's say the last 100 years has hit that at some point. It's like something is missing here, and it's meaning. And everyone's talking about anyone in any of these podcast circles knows this, but I'm specifically trying to implicate or to call the scientific community to task for maybe reductive materialism, where you are just a biological robot with no free will, no personhood in a meaningless universe. Maybe that's not a great worldview.
And maybe you don't actually believe it. Sorry to interrupt you. This kind of hit a pet peeve of mine. Is that what I don't believe anybody who argues for determinism.
Sure.
I mean, whether they're conscious of it or not, is that fundamentally, I think anybody who argues for determinism is attempting to manipulate you, whether directly or that they don't want to be held accountable for their actions. Because if there is no such thing as free will, then you're not responsible for anything. Right? And anybody who argues determinism, I want to test this. Normally, these conversations happen over virtual methods, right? But if I'm able to have this conversation with somebody in person and someone starts arguing determinism, I just want to take their wallet.
Just hit them.
Walk off with it, right? And then when they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean, what am I doing? Well, you're taking my wallet. I'm like, well, I can't be responsible for it. It's just, the nature of balls bouncing around and, why do you care? It's just what's happening. Right?
Same thing for people who argue that there's no such thing as morality.
Correct. But yes. But on this free will one in particular, and I don't believe the people who argue that there's no such thing as morality believe in it either. I think it's just a way of manipulating. But for addressing the scientific community supposedly in particular, this idea that, okay, we're just a bunch of balls bouncing around and we there's no such thing as free will. They will immediately try to hold you responsible for something if you do something bad to them, so they don't believe it. So quit purveying it onto me. Sorry, pet peeve button that you.
No, of course,
there, yeah.
And I think that's a proper reaction because when somebody is like a big arrogant jerk all of the time and then they get something wrong, everybody wants to dunk on them. It's just kind of human nature. And I guess I feel like the scientific community since the scientific revolution has been such a triumphalist movement, and it's been so strident in its massive claims about its superiority as a methodology and a worldview, and there's it needs to answer for things like nuclear bombs. It needs to answer
poison gas. Those are the two things I was thinking. We invented poison gas and nuclear bombs. You may worship us now. Okay. Yeah.
World War II is the whole 20th century, really. Yes, there's a lot of material prosperity. Also, the most people killed ever in I think it's the most people died in the 20th century than all previous centuries combined. And I don't think that that's a population issue necessarily. I think that no other time in history did we see technological advances so completely funneled into, and wealth and civilian activity funneled into murder. That was just every country who did, our country, the Soviets, the Germans, the British, we've got to kill them all as efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
It's anyway, that's a whole different topic.
Yeah, that is. We're getting kind of long here, so I'll try to wrap this up. But just going back to Isaac Newton, are you familiar with the guy, Dr. E. Michael Jones?
I'm not.
Okay. I've interviewed him here. He's a Catholic guy. He wrote a book on it's supposed to be a critique on the history of usury versus labor.
Okay.
Very economic, but his argument is that economics is actually a moral um, science. For maybe that's the term he used, but you have to address economics morally, or else you end up with crap. And he writes this whole book arguing that, and he actually has a couple chapters on Isaac Newton, because one thing that Isaac Newton did, he argues, is that he took the telos out of the universe.
Hmm.
Because this is fascinating. I don't know if you knew this. Isaac Newton was an alchemist, like seriously,
Oh,
seriously into alchemy, right? Like when they found his library after he died, like 60% of the books were alchemy books or something like that. And they posthumously took a sample of his hair and tested it for mercury, and he had like 40 times the amount of mercury that most people did, because they were obsessed with mercury for alchemy, right? And Dr. Jones' argument is that Isaac Newton was into, I'm gonna not remember the Greek guy's name. Euripides? Started with an E. An alchemist from like 800 BC or something, that made the argument that all reality is the working out of love versus strife. That it's this tension between love versus strife, and all Isaac Newton did was rename strife inertia and rename love gravity, and that the universe exists as this tension of gravity and inertia. And so, because it's that, there doesn't need to be any meaning. There doesn't need to be any telos, and that everything can just run on its own. And this was, like you were pointing out, there was kind of this basis of the scientific revolution that really came out of Isaac Newton. And I mean, I'm not trying to dunk Isaac Newton like into the garbage and say like he was this horrible person that didn't do anything useful. But what was extrapolated from that is we don't need God to explain the universe anymore. But because there's this alchemical principle between love and strife that keeps the universe going, is essentially the argument. And then Dr. Jones takes it on to say that Adam Smith's economic arguments were his attempt to make a physics out of economics in the same way that Isaac Newton did. So instead of love and strife or gravity and inertia, you had competition and free market. I think were the two. With competition and what was the other one? Whatever. It was taking the same principle to try to take the telos out of economics as well. But just to the point, going back to Isaac Newton and to the scientific revolution, is I think Dr. Jones made a very interesting point here, that Isaac Newton was able to take the telos out of understanding the universe, which sounds scientific until you realize his argument for it was alchemy, essentially.
yeah. I mean, the I'm always trying to scandalize people with how much the founders of the modern scientific revolution were obsessed with alchemy, and it's been suggested by people like C.S. Lewis that alchemy and science, as we understand it today, really have the same telos, which is to
Yeah.
dominate nature.
Mm.
And the impulse is the same, that man must dominate and control nature. And alchemy, for various reasons, didn't end up working, and science ended up working better. And so that's the one that takes the victory in history. But it's like the impulse is the same, which is to conquer, to conquer nature, which is a very different relationship than the to bring it all the way back around than the original kind of Christian understanding, which is that Adam is made as the gardener. He's the steward of nature. He's supposed to grow it and cultivate it. Even before the fall, the text of Genesis says that there's work to do. God puts Adam in the garden to cultivate it. So he wants us to continue the act of creation, to subcreate. That's what Tolkien talked about. To be co-creators with God, to share in his production of the world, but in the absence, being disconnected from God, in the absence of being holy and walking with God, we have instead perverted that towards control and power and the rape of nature. I mean, this is how some of these people talked about it. So, something I always used to say in class was, The problem isn't knowledge. We have so much knowledge and information and power. People are like, oh well, people are just stupid. That's the problem with stuff. It's like, no, we do a lot of things. The problem is we're immoral. I mean, we don't have a moral center. We don't have a moral grounding. So we need to recover holiness and the virtues in order to wield this power and technology and science well. Otherwise, we're just going to do what we did in the 20th century with it again, and who knows? Now we're doing it in a soft way, with the phone. So that's maybe a good kicking off point to think about, what do we really need? Like, what's our journey to reality? That's why I named the book this, because you're not real yet, and you have to have the humility to accept that you're not real, that you don't need more information, you don't need more power, you need to be good.
Everyone, please like, comment, and subscribe to help us grow this channel. I think we cover a lot of good stuff. We're covering ideas that you're not hearing anywhere else. Economic ideas, historical ideas, systematic politics ideas you're not hearing anywhere else.